watching A Child Mad. This is episode 50. I started this podcast beginning of April because I had nothing else to do, and for some reason you all are still watching it, so thank you very much. Today I'm joined by definitely one of the coolest guests I've had, Alan Cross. What's going on, man?
Just like you, I have been in this eternal loop of Groundhog Days. Every day is the same. I was supposed to be in the Caribbean later this week. That's not happening. But what are you going to do? You got to hunker down. And my thing is that the best antidote for anxiety in these times is optimism. So I choose to believe that things are going to get better sooner rather than later. And if they're not, well, I'll just recalibrate.
Where in the Caribbean were you going?
I was going to a little island called Bequia, which is in the Grenadines, and a beautiful little place. We were going with another couple, and it all just fell through because, well, who wants to go and be quarantined for a week and then come home and be quarantined for 2 weeks? So not going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. So what have you been up to? Like, how have you reformatted what you've been doing because of COVID?
Oddly enough, I haven't reformatted anything because I do work out of my house. I have everything that I need here. I have my own studio. I have all my CDs, my records, my music files, my book library. I really haven't changed things much other than not going. I haven't been going out to do face-to-face meetings. I would often meet with clients. I would often meet with potential clients. I would meet with other radio people. I would meet with people at Chorus, who is my biggest client. I just can't do that anymore. I haven't been to the Chorus building since, I think, February. But then again, I haven't seen my parents since December. So my wife and I are hunkered down in the house. My basement, the basement is my office. She has an office on the second floor. The main floor is pretty much the lunchroom. And we see each other briefly in the morning. We may see each other during a coffee break. And then we will see each other for dinner. And it's been that way since March.
I was going to say, so it hasn't really felt any different from what you're usually doing?
Not for me, for her, definitely, because she would commute and go into an office at Yonge and Eglinton. And she works with a team that needs to collaborate on a continuous basis. So it's difficult, has been, difficult for her. For me, all my collaboration for the last, since about 2011 has been from home and online. You know, if I've got WeTransfer and Dropbox and a strong internet connection, now with Zoom and Google Hangouts and everything, I'm good. I don't need to go anywhere else. Although, I'll give you an example. Last week, I had to go to the dentist for a cleaning, and I was looking forward to it because it got me out of the house. That's sad. I sometimes, you know, any normal year, I would be on an airplane going somewhere in the world once a month. So now what I do is I lock myself in the powder room on the main floor and pretend that I'm in an airplane bathroom. That's as close to travel as I've been getting. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's an adjustment for sure, and it's good to know that, like, you're able to transfer everything over, and I'm assuming you're just doing all your calls online and stuff like that.
Everything's online. Occasionally, I will be able to go out and talk to somebody in a responsible, physically distant manner. In fact, I just came back from a lunch meeting with somebody who was in the same kind of bubble as I am, so it was okay. But as for, you know, larger meetings or I can't go to Toronto right now. Although I have a lot of work that I need to be doing with people based in Toronto, I can't go. So there's something to be said for especially if you work in the entertainment business, there's something to be said for that personal touch where you have people in the same room socializing over drinks or a meal or even just a cup of coffee, where you seem to get things done because of the human connection. It's you know, Zoom is great, but it's not the same.
How much do you think the industry is going to change because we're not having as much of that personal connection?
Quite a bit, I think, but I don't know how. That's the problem. History is still being written at the moment. We won't understand exactly how much things have changed probably for another year. Now, we are moving quickly to an era when we will have vaccines, but then that's a whole other kettle of fish. That's a whole other level of existence. We don't know where that's going to lead. I don't think that we'll get back to anything approaching normal until 2022. And even then, normal is going to be different from what we remember. What I mean by that is unclear, but I know that we're not going to go back to the way things were before all this hit. It may be close, and there may be people who will try to go back to the pre-2020 normality. But I think there's a lot of people that are very concerned. For example, the next time that the pandemic is good and truly over when you go to a show and you see a mosh pit. But I don't think you're going to see a lot of mosh pits for quite some time just yet, because who wants to, rub up against sweaty, smelly strangers?
Well, I mean, if you ask a certain amount of people, they'd say, yes, I want to go to a show that fucking badly. But
yeah, we probably will, but it won't be, there will be other people standing back going, are you crazy? I mean, I just came for the bank. That was another big outing today. And everybody in the bank was wearing a mask except this one woman who came in. And the looks she got was like, how dare you? You selfish thing. So there's going to be a polarization where there's going to be a bunch of people who say, it's over, let's get back to normal. We don't have to worry about anything. And then there's going to be the other people who are suffering from a certain amount of post-traumatic stress disorder who think, I remember what this is like. I'm terrified now, and I don't want to chance it. So it's like I say, it'll be at least sometime in 2022 before we're approaching what we used to remember.
And I think the biggest thing I think is going to carry over when shows are back is the use of masks. Because like in Japan or other Asian countries, for example, it's very common to wear masks on a day-to-day basis walking around. Like, I think that's definitely going to carry over into live shows.
I think so too. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Asia, Japan, Singapore, China. And yeah, I mean, masks are a part of everyday life. And I think they're going to continue to be part of everyday life for the foreseeable future. Now, the good news is that if we continue to practice the kind of hygiene that we've been practicing this year, it's going to cut down on the flu. It's going to cut down on colds. It's going to cut down on a lot of things. I mean, if you look right now at the statistics for seasonal influenza, it's way down. Nobody is getting the flu because we're all being so very, very careful about COVID. So yeah, it's going to be maybe a bit weird going to shows to see people in masks, but it's probably the responsible thing to do for the foreseeable future.
Well, I think it's also the masks are becoming so much more normalized now, and that's why, like you said, for example, at the bank, that one lady who wasn't wearing a mask, everyone kind of stared daggers at her, as opposed to everyone else wearing a mask, being like, "Okay, let's just do this, get through it." Like, I don't even notice the mask at this point anymore.
No, neither do I. And I have one in the center console in the car. Every one of my jackets has a mask in the pockets. So I get out of the car, and just like I automatically reach to lock the car, I automatically reach to put on a mask. I don't even think about it anymore. And then walking through a store, when you see somebody without a mask, that's weird.
How often were you going to shows prior to COVID?
Once a month. I mean, I've been to so many shows in my life that the novelty has kind of worn off. And if you want me to go see your band play at 12:15 on a Wednesday morning, not going to happen. Sorry, I'm past that. But I will go see bands that I like or bands that I'm really interested in. I will travel to see. I think the last big concert I was at. You know what? The last big concert I was at was 1 year ago today, when I went to Singapore. When I went to see U2 in Singapore.
Oh wow!
And the last show I was at was in January in Las Vegas. I went to see David Lee Roth. I haven't been to a gig since.
Anything on a more local level or no?
Nothing in person. No, because when I got back from Las Vegas, things started to get weird. And, by the time we get into February, shows are being canceled. I mean, I was hoping to go see Pearl Jam. I was hoping to go see the Foo Fighters. I was hoping to go see a whole bunch of things. But, starting in March, I guess it was Pearl Jam. The Gigaton tour, they were supposed to start it in Toronto on the 28th of March.
Yep.
And it was like 10 days before that they canceled. So somewhere around, there wasn't much going on, I guess, in February. But by the time we got to mid-March, everybody was canceling. And at that point, people started to get, worried. Should I do have tickets to this show, but do I want to go? And here's where we are.
Do you think after all this, because I've asked this the past couple of guests I've had, because I think it's an interesting concept to think about. Like you mentioned, 2022s where things start going back to a more normal-ish kind of stage. Do you think there is going to be some sort of like live music renaissance, especially on more of a localized level, where because we're losing a fuck ton of venues right now, but are we going to a surplus of shows coming back like every night of the week? Or
Well, I think what's going to happen is that there's going to be a tremendous pent up demand for people to get out and do things. How they're going to do that's another story. But right now, there has been 9 months of people making music at home. So there is going to be this huge torrent of new music coming out over the next, well, let's just pick an arbitrary date after March 1st. Again, just an arbitrary date. Recording studios are going to be booked up. Record labels are going to have a really hard time scheduling releases because of the backlog. I think that there is going to be a period of time where there's this pent up release of a need to socialize is going to happen. Now, some people will say that we saw the same sort of thing in the 1920s after the Spanish flu of 1918, 1920. And then we had the roaring 20s. And they say that we're heading for, Elon Musk, for example, says we're heading for another roaring 20s because of the same sort of pent up emotion that happened 100 years ago. Well, I don't agree with that because we were coming off World War I, which was tremendously traumatic. The United States at that point was responsible for like 50% of the world's manufacturing, so they were able to lead. When we did have that pandemic back then, there was very little government assistance. So debt did not go up. Government debt did not go up. And people were basically left to fend for themselves with the exception of families and local charities. It's rather interesting, too, that if you go back to 1920, 1921, 1922, you will find very, very, very few songs written about that pandemic. Maybe 3, maybe 4 that I found so far. So there seemed to be some kind of collective amnesia following that pandemic that it doesn't really even show up much in literature. And that's weird. 50 to 100 million people around the world died from that influenza. So I think what's going to happen is we now are going to remember. We're not going to forget. Debt for governments and corporations, well, for governments anyway, is going to be really, really high. Taxes will have to go up to compensate for those expenditures. And we have more people to deal with than we did back in 1920.
And I think it's also going to be more memorable because not only with social media has it stopped all the shows, but it's also allowed artists to figure out alternatives of ways of making money. So like getting on social media, developing a social media following, streaming, doing the live stream shows. What are your thoughts on those live stream shows?
They're a stopgap measure. I mean, nobody's making big money on that. I mean, if you are an artist and you're accustomed to making $25,000 or $50,000 a night, when you do a live stream show, you're making $1,000. There are a lot of artists that I know, big name artists that you would know, that are surviving on their SOCAN checks, their radio royalty checks. I know so many other bands that are actually on unemployment because most of their money came from playing live. And if they can't play live, well, they're not selling any records and they don't make any money from streaming. So what's left? I mean, there are a few bands that have managed to really turn the live stream thing into a moneymaker, or at least a decent moneymaker, but they're few and far between.
Any thoughts on the drive-in show concept, kind of in the same vein?
It's played out. It did well. But that's one of those things that's very seasonal. You might see some of this stuff in the southern U.S. over the next couple of months. But north of, let's say, Nashville, you're not going to because of the weather.
Yeah. Do you think that format's going to carry over into the next season?
Maybe. It all depends on where we are with the vaccine. If we get people vaccinated in the spring, then, for example, Live Nation and Ticketmaster have plans to return to concerts at scale in 2021. Of course, they're going to say that because they have to be optimistic and they have to make plans just in case it does happen. You can always push it back, but if suddenly you have to get back into business, you have to have all your ducks in a row.
Are you going to go for that first round of vaccines, or are you going to kind of wait to see how everyone else reacts?
Well, I won't have a chance because they're going to give it to frontline workers first. Then they're going to give it to elderly people. Then they're going to give it to people with pre-existing conditions. So I'm way down the list. By the time I get it, and my wife and I were talking about this, September, August next year, by that time we will have millions of people jabbed, and we'll have an idea of how things are working and how it's affecting the virus.
Yep, that's very good. All right, so we're going to take our first music break right now, and then we're going to hear a word from our sponsor, Anchor, and then we'll be right back with Alan Cross. See you in a few.
I'm here, sitting on the East Coast, with no place to call home, looking for a new horizon or an ever-changing scene. Another flight, no spare to get me there. These roads are eating up on my past. 2 lanes, Holly for my highway, solid. Your lines keep me on track. 'Cause I can take it. What's one more shirt off my back? 'Cause I can take it. What's one more take of gas? Sundown, weaving through the Rockies. My rear view mirrors blinding me. Pulling over off the highway, lost track of all the miles behind me. Out here, I made it to the West Coast in my 1990 Caravan. Broke down, never thought I'd make it. Nothing but a red dot on a map. 'Cause I could take it. What's one more shirt off my back? 'Cause I could take it. What's one more take of gas? I chose these roads I'm taking. Each moment tries to break me. I know this trip won't be my life. 'Cause I could take it. What's one more shirt off my back? 'Cause I could take it. What's one more take of gas? What's one more shirt off my back? 'Cause I could take it. What's one more take of gas? 'Cause I can take it.
All right, welcome back to part 2. Al, I want to talk to you about your career because you've been involved in broadcasting since the early 80s, and now we're in 2020. So you're spanning a few decades. Looking back, what are some of the more memorable moments of your career thus far?
Oh, there are so many. My issue with looking back is that I don't do it very often. One of the things that I think has kept me in the business for this length of time is I'm always interested in what's now and what's next. And it's a surprise, even now, when you say that I've been in the business since commercial radio, since 1981. So come 40 years. my reaction to that is like, really? Has it been that long?
Well, Tom
But yeah,
one,
I mean,
so.
well, I guess. I mean, one of the things about radio is that when you enter it, you stay the age for you stay the same age that you entered it for the rest of your career. So I think I'm still 22 years old. I'm behaving like I'm a 22-year-old. I'm thinking like I'm a 22-year-old. It's just part of what happens with this business. And because every radio person has a best before date on their forehead that they can't see, sometimes the end of their careers sneak up on them. They become too old. They become too expensive. They become outdated. They lose touch. They can't keep up with technology, all those sorts of things. And they're either, swept out of the industry, they quit, or they die. And I've been very good, apparently, at being able to push that best before date on my forehead back every single year. At the moment, I'm pretty good. I'm not terribly worried about the future. I think I've got another couple of years to do what I'm doing. And when you ask, what are the most memorable things? I don't know. It's meeting your heroes, having an opportunity to be part of. One of the best parts was from about 1990 to 1995. Music was changing rapidly at that point. It was Generation X's time to take over. So starting with really in 1990, before grunge really hit, you had the feeling that there was going to be this sea change in culture as Generation X came of age and was going to sweep out the baby boomers as far as the people who were in charge of the direction of music. And it wasn't just alternative stuff, although that was a big driver, but it was also hip hop, which was becoming very big at the time. And from that time, let's say 90 to 95, there was this sense that you were in the middle of history. Every week was bringing something different. You were part of a cultural change and you felt it. You didn't know what was coming next, but you knew that whatever was coming next was going to be really cool. It seemed that every week a brand new band, a brand new song, a brand new album was coming out that you couldn't believe that something this cool, this great could still be producible by someone after, 40 years of rock. That was a tremendously exciting time. We had Lollapalooza, we had the Tragically Hip and their roadside attraction. We were doing Edgefest at that time and getting 40,000 people out. CD sales, record sales were going through the roof. It was a really exciting time to be involved with music, either from my side, the broadcast side, or from the side of the artists in the industry, or from the sides of the fans. It was pretty awesome. And I've lived through a couple of those eras. The other one would be in the 1980s. And it was only when I realized in retrospect, like the early part of the 80s, when there was another technological shift where we moved away from straight guitar, bass, and drums into things like synthesizers and sequencers and drum machines and samplers. And you look back on, 79, 80, 81, 82, and you realize that music again was shifting. And you were getting all these new sounds, all these new audiences, and it was really cool. So I would say those two periods, the early 90s first, the early 80s second, were two of the most exciting times that I've lived through as far as my career goes.
And what are your thoughts in comparison to, obviously, in the 90s, like you mentioned, every week there's a new band, music's evolving, music's changing, everyone's excited about music, record sales are so high. Comparing it to now, where it's a lot of recycled sound, remixing of songs, Spotify charts are reigning supreme. Like, what are your thoughts on music now versus music then?
Well, it comes down to this idea that there is no center to music anymore. The stars we have today are nowhere near as big as the stars that we had back in the 80s and 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. God, I can't remember the last album that sold 10 million. Well, I can't. Adele's 25 album was the last album to sell 10 million copies. And that was an anomaly. Everybody's their own music director now because they have access to 70 million songs on their phone. They don't need the radio. They don't need the video channels. They don't need the record stores. They don't need music magazines to tell them what to listen to. They can listen to whatever they want. And as a result, everything has become very fragmented. And there is no consensus, no large-scale consensus, like there used to be, of what's good. Now, I'll give you this example. I use it quite a bit. When I was in grade 10, there were 30 people in my class. And of those 30 people, 2 of them were country music fans. 7 of them would have been pop music fans. And the other 21 people would have been Kiss fans. And the reason they were Kiss fans is because the guy on the radio told you that Kiss was the greatest band of all time. The magazines told you that Kiss was this really, really cool band. You go to the record store and what's racked up front? All these Kiss records. So this idea that the record labels and the record stores and the radio stations were filtering through all this music that was coming out, and some stuff would rise to the top, whether it be organically or artificially. But, Kiss would be this really huge band, and we all agreed that Kiss was the greatest. You don't have that kind of mass consensus today. You ask, and you don't even have loyalties to genres or loyalties to eras anymore. I do some teaching at Humber College, and one of the first things I do is ask people to bring out their phones and tell me the last 10 songs that they played. So somebody will pull out a playlist and, be, Cardi B, followed by Justin Bieber, followed by the Beatles, followed by ACDC and Led Zeppelin, and then followed by, Hozier, followed by Smashing Pumpkins, followed by Green Day. I mean, there's no allegiance to any particular sound or genre. It's very ecumenical, which I think is a good thing. Don't get me wrong. It's a very good thing. But when you have that much, when you spread your musical preferences over that wide a palette, you become a much more informed music fan. But at the same time, you don't build stars the way they used to. I mean, here's a question. How many bands can you name? And we'll start with rock bands. No, we'll start with anybody. How many artists can you name that have emerged since 2000 that are capable of filling an arena? Now compare that number to the people capable of filling an arena in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's much smaller. And the reason is that we've done a lousy job of developing superstar acts, and the ones that we have developed aren't as big as they used to be. As Gloria Swanson would say, it's not the people that got small, it's the movies.
You mentioned radio and print media having such exposing younger generations to music at that time. What are your thoughts now on radio's impact on new listeners?
Radio needs to get their act together when it comes to presenting music and providing a proper music experience for everybody. When I was growing up, there were 3 top 40 stations in Winnipeg, and you aligned yourself with one of these stations, and you aligned yourself based on which radio station fulfilled your needs for music knowledge. And the cool thing about Top 40 was it played you the top songs from all the different genres. So you were very, very well versed at what was happening in popular culture. And in between the songs, the DJs would often tell you something about that artist. And that was great because I would, and especially if you tuned into FM, where FM in Canada had all these rules about, and they were called foreground rules, surveillance rules, and mosaic rules, which forced by law, by the terms of your license, the announcers to talk about the music. And that was a very important thing because it became a source of music discovery. It became a source of music knowledge, and the music began to mean much more to you because you understood where it was coming from. Today we have streaming, which is awesomely convenient, but it's just a stream of songs. There's no one to tell you why that song is important, where the artist came from, why you should not skip this song because if you listen for this or if you understand that, the song will become more meaningful to you. There is no one to take you by the hand and explain. There's no context, is what I'm saying. And what we end up with is organized noise. There's not even artwork. There's no liner notes. All you get is a stream of songs coming into your head, and then it's gone. And if you don't like a song, well, there's the skip button. And, listening to the radio, I mean, you could change the station, but otherwise you would just listen through to a song until, in the hopes that something better was coming up next. But if you heard that song that you didn't like often enough, the penny might have dropped and you go, oh yeah, you know what? Sometimes you need unintentional repeated exposure to a song before you figure out that it's actually good. And I'll give you the best example that I can. If you listen to Led Zeppelin 4, side 1, track 1, begins with Black Dog. Then it goes to Rock and Roll, another great song. And you know that Stairway to Heaven is coming up at the end of side 1. But before you get to Stairway to Heaven, you have this weird mandolin song called Battle of Evermore, featuring this woman named Sandy Denny from some weirdo band called Fairport Convention. Well, back in the day of vinyl, you would put on side 1 of Led Zeppelin 4, play track 1, play track 2, endure track 3, because track 4, Stairway to Heaven, was coming up. And I hated Battle of Evermore. But because I was too lazy to get up and move the needle, I heard it over and over and over again against my will. And then one day, it went, hey, this is a really cool song. Oh, they're talking about J.R.R. Tolkien. Oh, I get it now. And now Battle of Evermore is one of my favorite Led Zeppelin songs. But it took a long time, and nobody's willing to give some songs, the necessary time for it to sink in.
So then what are your thoughts then on artists breaking because of Spotify playlist exposure?
That's just the way it works these days. If you get on the right playlist and the algorithm takes over and you have people that listen all the way through and don't skip, then it rises further to the top, and then there you go. People are always looking for new and cool. I guess one of the best examples would be the Rap Caviar playlist. Get on that and you have a chance of blowing up. But that's fine. It's in some sense, it's no different than the way radio works, in that you have a record label fighting to get your song on a radio station's playlist. And if you get it on the playlist, well, then you have a chance of sales and streams. So it's no different. It's just done with fewer people and more algorithms.
I interviewed Brian Moncars a few months back, and something I asked him, which I want to ask you, is where do you think radio's place is going to be in 5 to 10 years? Because, like, for example, automobiles are, instead of having radios now, are coming with Spotify subscriptions. So where do you think radio is going to be down the line?
Okay, radio is in an interesting situation. It is still very popular. It's still very profitable. It's still very powerful. So in other words, what it's been doing since the 1920s is working. However, technology is changing, and people are expecting different things from their audio entertainment. Radio has to adopt. However, because it's still working, this adoption is kind of like changing the wings on an airplane that's flying at 38,000 feet. So radio is very slowly looking at technological augmentations to what they do. And we're very, very careful, and we're moving very slowly, because 20 years ago, before the dot-com bubble burst, we were getting very, very deep into new online technology. And we, at that time, collectively the industry, decided that they were going to build proprietary platforms for online listening and online interaction. That took a very long time, was very expensive, and by the time it rolled out, there were a bunch of bugs in it, and it didn't really matter because the rest of the industry had moved on. So the technology that we created was obsolete by the time it was debuted. So a lot of people ended up losing their jobs. A lot of money was wasted, and radio felt very, very burned. So after a number of years of sitting on the sidelines and trying to figure out, how do we deal with Facebook? How do we deal with MySpace? Then how do we deal with Facebook? How do we deal with Twitter? Do we co-opt this? What do we do with our websites? Oh, wait a second. We wanted to stream music. Well, we can't do that because of the financial considerations involved in getting a streaming license. We stopped, for example, building websites based on proprietary platforms and, gravitating to WordPress, for example, and building everything through WordPress, which was a whole lot easier. And then we started with blogs, and then we started with podcasts. So we're working on things. We have, for example, in the dashboard, something called Radio Player Canada, which is something that will allows you access to 600 radio stations across the country from the, without having to plug in your phone, which is great. We also have are fighting with the automobile manufacturers, not just us, it's around the world, fighting with automobile manufacturers to make sure that radio functions in the infotainment system in cars is right up front. So I got into a rent when I was traveling. I would rent a different car wherever I was, different model of car wherever I was, just to see how the infotainment system worked. And I got into a Cadillac once, and I couldn't find the radio, and that was really disconcerting. So we are working with automobile manufacturers to make sure that apps like Radio Player, which, by the way, has been adopted by, I think, 14 or 15 countries around the world, to make sure the radio is front and center of the car. Now, that being said, what happens when we get to autonomous vehicles, when you actually don't have to have your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the road? I don't know. That's down the road yet, but we're thinking about it.
No, that's definitely a phenomenal explanation, because that is a growing concern with a lot of people, especially with the development of changing over automobiles. Something else I want to talk to you about.
Wait, before I go further, there's something that we didn't expect, and that was COVID. Radio listening has gone up during the period of COVID because people want to know what's happening in their town. If I go out, will I get sick? Or I just want some human. I'm stuck in my house, my condo, my apartment, and I want a human touch. And yeah, I could put on a Spotify playlist, but there's no human activity there. Give me humanity. I'll even take the commercials because it shows me that the world is still functioning. So radio has done quite well over the COVID period.
So it was slowly going down because now it's slowly going back up a bit.
Well, it was slowly going down before COVID.
Yeah.
Radio used to be, one of the big games in town. It's not. I mean, you have to share it with everything from, the internet to a game console. There's only so much time in a person's life for entertainment. And we have so many entertainment options right now that some things will have to go by the wayside. I mean, you can see it with television. All the, viewership for traditional cable television is dropping. And as people are going for streaming services and over-the-top services. So, the technology has shuffled the deck tremendously. And we aren't done yet.
Oh, yeah, definitely more to come. Something I definitely want to get your mind about is the K-pop system of developing pop idols and then pushing them out kind of like a factory format. What's your general thoughts on that whole format?
Well, they've just they've just raised it to a science. This is something that's been happening with music forever, where you take the pieces of what you think will be a successful entity, put them all together, and hope for the best. If you boy bands, go all the way back to you could make the argument that the Beatles were a boy band in their early days. They did come together themselves; they weren't manufactured. But shortly after the Beatles came out, we had the Monkees, and then we had a variety of bubblegum groups. Then we had the Osmonds and all those the Jackson 5. So this is nothing new. It's just that the Koreans have really, really perfected the art of putting together stylish, good-looking pop bands for a specific sort of music market. Now, pop music is the biggest genre on the planet. It's music with training wheels. You can dance to it. You can sing along to it. You can tap your fingers on the steering wheel to it. There are billions and billions of pop fans, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the music that they like. Probably the people that are watching this program consider themselves to be slightly more serious music fans than the pop kids. Yeah. And when you graduate from pop to rock or hip hop or something, you want to learn more. You want to be deeper. You don't want the superficial. You want something with more meaning, which is why a lot of people in their late 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, they're into pop music because it's the easiest music to digest. But when they get into high school and they start having to use music to figure out who they are and to project their identity to the rest of the world, well, then they begin to fragment into different genres. So maybe you become a metal kid, or you become a punk kid, or you become a hip hop kid, or you become a dance kid, or whatever. And that's when everything begins to fragment into different things. But it's still, you still have this massive mainstream pool of listeners who just want to be able to sing along to a happy song.
It's the ones that aren't looking for that authenticity, and that's my issue with, like, whether it be labels like Universal or labels in Korea. I've never connected with a song that comes across as artificial or that someone put together.
Well, this has been the problem with popular music for forever. What is authentic? What is authentic? I think we each have our own idea of what it is, but then sometimes authenticity doesn't matter. It just doesn't. I just want a song I can sing along to, and that's fine. Like I say, there are millions of people like us, but there are billions of people like them. And what we're looking for. See, one of the problems I have, for example, is that with pop music today, is that it's perfect. I mean, it is auto-tuned and quantized to perfection. And it's to the point where all the humanity has been bled out of it. And yes, it's perfect, but art doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes mistakes and imperfections make something more beautiful. And we have gotten completely out of that, thanks to producers like Max Martin, who have, a real good formula for writing very successful pop songs. But to me, those pop songs, they do nothing for me because they're perfect. And I want a little bit of rawness and roughness in what I listen to, which can be interpreted as a form of authenticity.
Do you think there ever is going to be more real authenticity back in the popular music stream, or are we just going to continue cycling down the reduce, reuse, recycle format?
Well, here's the problem that we have. There's always going to be punk bands. There's always going to be alternative bands. There's always going to be indie bands that are formed and continue on because of that desire to be authentic. Those aren't going away. The polished pop bands have always been with us. Whether we'll continue with this particular style of production is to be seen. So maybe not. A lot of it's going to be driven by technology. And we'll go back to streaming. A frightening number of people will press the skip button within 5 seconds of a song they don't think they're going to like or they don't know. And then more are gone by 10 seconds and more are gone by 30 seconds. What's important to note is that none of the music streaming services will pay out unless somebody listens to your song for 30 seconds. So producers, songwriters, engineers, record labels are all trying to keep our attention for 30 seconds. That means shorter intros. That means putting the choruses up front. That means sticking in a billion sugar high hooks in that first 30 seconds. Anything to drag us to second number 31. So this need to grab our short attention span is actually perverting the composition and production of music. That worries me. Songs are getting shorter. If you look at the charts right now and compare them back to 2000, you'll see that a great number of songs are getting shorter and getting closer to that 2-minute mark. And the reason you have a 2-minute song is because you can cycle that song over many, many times on a playlist, thereby generating more money. There has been a trend towards having longer albums with shorter songs on them because you want to be able to have people cycle through all these songs, and every 30 seconds somebody gets paid. So there's technology is warping music, and it worries me.
And what are your thoughts on like social media, for example? Because there was a documentary recently that came out called The Social Dilemma, in which a major thing that's discussed is how quickly someone gains a following, but as well as how quickly a song can get exposed. So like TikTok, for example, has taken over the world massively and has helped several songs go viral. Like Doja Cat's the first one that immediately comes to mind because she had a song that went viral on TikTok, and now she's nominated for a Grammy for it. It's like, how do you think it's going to continue down the line? Is that retention rate going to get shorter?
It's very possible. I mean, TikTok's clips are restricted to 30 seconds, right? Now, if you look, it's the way it's going to be for a while. If you look deep in the liner notes of the new ACDC album, which came out 2 weeks ago, you will find that one of the songs has carved out a 30-second TikTok clip. And, oh, wait, hang on.
Bless you.
Sorry. And I talked to Brian Johnson about this, and he says, hey, you know, what are you going to do? It's just the way the things have evolved, mate. This is the way the industry works. You just got to change with the times. So I don't know. Again, technology has always changed the course of music. And we're seeing new types of technology coming faster and faster, and they're all changing the course of music. What happens, you know, now that, you know, Facebook, for example, is allowing as music streaming licenses, what's going to happen when full songs show up in your Facebook stream? What's going to be the result of that? Nobody saw TikTok coming with songs that, using songs that became, you know, undeniably huge. I mean, look what happened with Fleetwood Mac and Dreams and the guy with the cranberry juice. This is a song that was, you know, from 1977, 78. And based on that 30-second clip, the Rumors album was back on the Billboard charts for the first time in 42 years. So you know that record labels are looking at TikTok and going, how can we make this happen for our older audiences? Because as much as people focus on new songs, record labels have tens of millions of older songs in their catalogs that are just sitting there, and they need to continue to exploit those songs to make them popular so they don't die, so they don't fall from human memory. And how are you going to do that? Well, you can put out box sets. That's one way. You can, you know, have classic rock and classic hits radio stations. That's another way. But then what do you do when you want to appeal to a younger audience? Well, you have things like TikTok and Instagram.
So are you going to be doing any of those TikTok dances to keep yourself going? Or?
Under no circumstances. I danced at my wedding, and that's where it ended.
All right, so we're going to take our final music break card now, and then we'll take another word from our sponsor, Anchor, and then we'll be back here in a bit to wrap this up. We'll see you in a few.
You I study when you were born for it. I'm not fuck you I study when you were born for it. I'm never growing up, 'cause I was born for it. And you'll die before you hear me call it quits. 'Cause I was born for it.
Welcome back to part 3 with Alan Cross. I'm curious. So I made a little post about it, and I asked a couple people to send in some questions. And a question I had was from, I believe, Sunset Poetry or something like that. I apologize if I butchered your name. When was the last time you heard the first 7 seconds of a song and was knocked on your ass?
The last time?
Mm-hmm.
I would say there was a Irish band earlier this year, or late last year, called Fontaine's DC. And they had a track called Boys in the Betterland. And it came on. I was listening to BBC Radio. It came on. It was like, oh, wow, what's this? So there you go. That was the last time. There have been a few times, and you really remember them. I remember hearing She Bangs the Drums from the Stone Roses for the first time and stopping, turning my head and looking at the turntable and thinking, oh my God, what is this? It's different for everybody, but when it happens, you never forget it.
Another question I have here, I can't read the username, but how does an artist get on your ear to get featured in your top 5? I had a feeling that question was going to come.
Yeah, I guess, let's see, so far this week, which would have started today, I have received 111 pitches. Oh, hang on just a second.
Yep.
Hold on. So I get pitched constantly by bands, both signed and independent. I get pitched by publicists. I get pitched by labels. And I try to go through as many of them as I possibly can. And I'm also always listening. So there's no secret, there's no magic bullet here. It's I've got music playing all the time from all sorts of different people, and every once in a while something just catches my ear, and I can't explain why. There's it just happens.
What are some of the stuff that you've posted recently that's really caught your ear?
All right, hang on. Well, let's go to the computer, and I'll tell you. Because let's see here. So if we go to my 5 songs you must hear this week list, which is something that I post every week. Open it up. Oh, okay. So there's a Toronto band called Sam Coffee and the Iron Lungs. They got a good song called Back with the Gang. The Dirty Nil, they're out of Dundas, Ontario. They've got a track called Blunt Force Concussion. Martin Gore of Depeche Mode has got a new EP coming out. He had an instrumental called Mandrill, which I really liked. I'm into bands like Idols, and there's a band called Left Field Messiah, which is made up of a bunch of people from Hot Hot Heat and Fits in the Tantrums that are really good. It changes from week to week. It really does.
Has there been any new developing Canadian acts that have caught your ear recently?
Oh, there's a lot. And I try to feature them on my daily radio show too. And who is this? Unknown name. Let my wife answer that.
Yeah, no worries.
I have a feeling it's somebody asked.
I'm from 647.
I have a feeling it's somebody asking for if I want my ducks clean. No. Anyway, I'm always, I have a feature on my radio show called Undiscovered Gem every Wednesday, and I'll find either an unsigned or band that came from out of left field that I think deserves 5 minutes of radio attention. So that changes every week as well.
Any names that immediately come to mind for that? Because
no, it's been a while. I'm on vacation, so I don't remember.
Fair enough. Yeah, because a lot of bands, especially I work with a lot of bands on the developing up the top label, and a lot of them, when they found out I was having you on, a bunch of them immediately messaged me being like, "Hey, can you send them our stuff?"
Yeah.
And
get in the queue. By the time I I have people on my website that help me sort through everything. So I'll send some recommendations to them. There's three of them, and I send them 50 things that make it through my filters, and then they whittle that down to 5. Then I do my 5 songs you must hear this week list, and then I do some recommendations on my radio show. So get in line. If you send me an email that says, "Hey, have you heard my song yet?" The answer is probably no. Do you know how many people are in front of you?
Start handing on numbers. You are number 475 in line.
Yes, that's not unusual. Yes.
Yeah. Alan, let's wrap this up because I know you're a busy man. You got a lot going on, and I appreciate you taking the time to have a chat with me for a bit. What do you got coming up next?
Well, more of the same, really. I've got some projects on the back burner, but again, it's hard to say how these projects will shake out given our current situation. But I'm trying to line things up so that I am available and ready for work when we can actually go ahead and do it. So I'll continue with my podcast. I'll continue with my radio shows. I'll continue doing my voice work. I'll continue doing all the stuff that can get me through COVID. But I've got plans for a few other things. Oh, I'll tell you one. Come September, I have a children's book coming up called The Science of Music.
Oh, wow.
I've been working on that for a couple of years, and now it's finally ready.
What made you want to write a children's book?
Somebody asked me. I said, okay.
Well, so you said The Science of Music. What kind of topics are like really discussed, like on what level?
Well, a number of years ago, I was the curator of a traveling science center museum exhibit called The Science of Rock and Roll. And I learned a lot about the scientific principles that go into making music and making instruments and listening to music and delivering music. And I just took some of that stuff and dumbed it down for somebody between the ages of 9 to 14.
All right. Well, Alan Cross got a children's book coming out, The Science of Music, September of next year.
September 7th, I think.
September 7th. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that. Alan, thanks again, man. Where can people find you and what you do?
You can find me at ajournalofmusicalthings.com. I'm on Twitter at Alan Cross. And send me an email anytime, alan@alancross.ca.
All right, perfect. That's it. We're done. Episode 50. Thank you guys who all checked out this podcast and the other podcasts and continue support. Next year is going to be some big stuff, and I got a really cool thing going for the Christmas podcast. But we'll get to that later. Alan, thank you once again, sir.
All right, you're welcome.